What's up? This is the Sisters in Therapy podcast. I'm Dr. Mercedes, LMFTS.
I'm Dr. Brittany Harrell, LPC.
I'm Dr. TK, LMFTS.
We are inviting you to be a part of our thoughtful, passionate conversations about all things life as it relates to mental health, because everything relates to mental health.
But more importantly, we're here to inspire you to love yourself and others.
This is a podcast where you'll get dope sessions, no copay, and keep in mind that this podcast is not meant to be a replacement relationship with a mental health professional. Now, let's get into the session.
What's up, everybody? We are back with another session of the Sisters in Therapy podcast. This week, we're going to talk about vulnerability. So I'm going to start off by defining what vulnerability is. It is the willingness to expose yourself. It is the willingness to expose. Can we start that over? Authentic self. You know what? I got this real how I want to say it. I'm not going to read it just like that.
Okay. We trust you, girl. You got it.
I can't say it again because my mic is on.
Oh, yeah, it was very inappropriate.
You heard it.
Very inappropriate.
Because he heard her.
This is not okay.
Y'all be clowning. I missed it.
Freedom, you know?
Woo,
Let's talk about freedom.
Lord help us.
We're back with another session of Sisters in Therapy podcast. This session, we're going to talk about vulnerability. Vulnerability is the willingness to expose one's authentic self, including fears, insecurities, and uncertainties. It involves being open and receptive to emotional or physical harm in order to foster genuine connections, trust, and authenticity. Ooh, that sounds necessary, but it sounds scary as hell.
I was about to say that's the one thing that stood out for me too was the scary as hell part. Like,
Because why would I want to be open and receptive to emotional and physical harm?
Yeah, no, that physical harm is what got me because
Emotional harm,
yeah,
that's that invisible hurt.
mm-hmm.
You can't even see those scars.
I was going to say, I feel like, and that's probably one of the main things that keeps us away from wanting to be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
What do y'all feel like? What are some of the main things that you see giving people a difficult time with wanting to be vulnerable?
I think one of the main things for a lot of people when they've attempted to be vulnerable and people either are not paying attention to them or they get pushed back from the attempt to be vulnerable. So that unfortunately ends up shaping their worldview of what vulnerability is. And it, once they take that chance, it's like, well, I'm not doing that no more because I have
humiliation, embarrassment. I think actually Shaq was just talking about he was saying to men, like, never be vulnerable to a woman because they're going to bring it back up. I just feel like in an unhelpful way later. And, you can't shape all those experiences, are based off one experience. You can't shape it like that.
Right. I don't know. I just feel like that. I saw that clip and I feel like I'm just going to say at his big age, like you got to do a little bit better.
He's also the same man who said he fumbled the bag when it came to his woman.
Well,
his wife, ex-wife.
There we have it, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah.
I like Shaq though.
I saw that and I don't know. I think people, this is a little off topic, but I know people can only speak to their personal experiences. I just feel like when you
get on these big
platforms, you gotta be responsible with what you're talking about.
That's a different subject, but that's a good point. Being responsible with when you put a mic to your face and a camera and record it and put it on social media. Right. Why do you think that is so important for us to know, like, this is a responsible seat we're sitting in because we're going to be sharing information?
It kind of goes down to integrity.
Okay.
For me.
I like that.
And obviously with us being licensed professionals, right, there is a responsibility to be of service in that way, right? Professionally. And so I think there's a huge amount of responsibility to use your skills, right, to educate the masses, but in a way that still represents integrity and tact, right? I think people miss that element. And I think that's also why people think being a therapist is easy because, like, you know how they say everybody has an asshole, right? Like, everybody has an opinion. So it can't be that hard of a job. So that's why we have an influx of podcast bros or just podcasts in general. Because
you said it right, podcast bros.
Yeah, because people have conversations they can, but like, what are we actually talking about?
How do we gossiping. Because I feel like he was trying to probably be vulnerable in that moment by saying that. So how do we balance that practice of vulnerability and responsibility?
I think, and that's a really good question. And
it is a really good question.
And it depends on who you're talking to, right? Like your audience. And I think I don't know who he was talking to.
He was talking about, he generalized women.
Right. And so even in that instance, if I was in that room, I would try to help him rephrase that statement, because is it true that it's just women, or is that just your experience, or do people in general throw things in your face? Because sometimes people just do that.
But we talked about that last on a session before this session about what we do when we encounter men who don't want to open up. We do our best to make the space safe for them. That's our responsibility when we're in their presence.
Right.
But how do y'all show up here? Y'all personally, what do y'all feel like? How do you check for your own?
Oh, I don't go on a rant, because I could go on
and being vulnerable at the same time.
I think we're responsible anyway. We're just so responsible. Because we know what our values are. We care about people. I care about Black people, but I also care about the field of mental health, and I care about the message I'm portraying. So our goal of this space is to make sure people know that it's okay if you're not okay.
Right.
That's one of our goals.
Was I don't center myself.
No.
I center the community. And so it's not just about my experiences. It's not just about pushing my envelope of this is what did or didn't work for me. It's
right.
How do I see the whole picture, and how do I help everybody else kind of see the whole picture?
But that's why I'm a therapist.
Yeah. And because you said that, I think it's also important to use an element of that vulnerability to humanize yourself as a therapist, especially when you're talking to clients.
Yes.
You know, in school, it's a very robotic, monolithic approach to therapy. But I truly do think there's a benefit to sharing. Like, you can't see nothing between, like, a little bit depending on the relevancy, right? And so there is an element of both parties being vulnerable because it's a safe space, and there are emotions that come with that, you know?
So are you talking about being responsible in a therapy room or right here?
I'm talking about both, but what you just hit on made me think about something. Because also I think it's even more important in the populations that we serve. If we're serving like BIPOC communities, I feel like even
BIPOC, break it down for the people.
Black, Indigenous, people of color.
Some people don't know what the acronyms are.
Okay, cool. So I think it's even more important in those settings just because there's such a it's almost like therapy is a part of the medical model and we can still be seen as outside providers. And so making it a common space, a space that is approachable is super important.
Yeah.
And so for me, practicing vulnerability and responsibility in the session might not mean you gonna know about all my relationship business, all my family business.
No.
But you're going to get my real authentic tone of voice, right? You're going to get some real facial expressions. You're going to get some real parts.
Some slang.
Yeah. Because not only have you created that safe space for them, you've created that safe space for you.
For me, absolutely.
Right?
So that you can thrive in that seat of being a space holder for them.
Yeah,
absolutely.
For sure. Okay. So when the general masses come into therapy, I'm sure we all have seen it. One of their biggest barriers is willingness to be open and vulnerable and expose themselves and say what they really need. How do we help those people navigate vulnerability in their relationships?
Do we even need to break down what vulnerability even is?
Okay, we can about that.
I mean, we gave a definition, but let's break it down.
No, but like, what does it look like practically? Like, what are some things that you've seen people have struggles with?
Conflict
when it comes to vulnerability,
when being able to express what they need from a person, whether it's your parent, your cousin, or your job, because even in the book This Her Flesh, what did she say? Like, we don't avoid conflict, we avoid the aftermath of the conflict, the abandonment that we think is going to give us. So I think that vulnerability means you have to be bold enough to say, I need to say this. Because if I don't, I can't be at war with myself just to keep this peace in this relationship. I think that's tapping into vulnerability.
Right. I like that you use that example because people view vulnerability as weak, right? Like you're like this soft little being tipping your toes around a situation. But like the reality of me expressing something to you as my partner, my friend, whatever, is a form of vulnerability. There's also an element of advocacy when it comes to that.
That's strength. That's the hard part.
Weakness
and love. Yes. Because I love you. I want you to grow in this relationship with me.
And because I love you, I want you to be able to love me in the way that I want to be loved.
And I want to love you how you want to be loved.
want to love me that way.
Right.
Okay.
Why do you all think it's difficult for people to be receptive to that form of conflict that you mentioned, like pushback?
Oh,
because I mean, when I think about vulnerability and just the barriers to vulnerability, it's always going to come back to humiliation and not trusting that people are going to stay once they know the real you or your needs or your feelings. Or sometimes, if we're being honest, sometimes people have not done enough self-exploration to know how to communicate their needs.
that's true. I think
So then they have these unfair expectations that friends or family and partners can meet said needs that they don't even know how to communicate.
Mhm.
So communication, poor communication skills is a barrier to vulnerability.
Also, Brittany, I think you also hit on the being the recipient of somebody else's vulnerability.
Mm.
I think we struggle with that because of the same thing, like you said, that fear of abandonment and loss that comes with it. Because if I admit that I've harmed you, if I admit that I've hurt you or done something wrong in some big way, then that means you have a reason to leave. You have a justifiable reason to leave. I can't say that I've not been perfect or that I've not been good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow. So even with that, just to add a little bit more onto that, it still goes into the common theme that we've talked about in every single session. It starts with self, right? Like,
yes,
we have to figure out what our fight or flight mode is, and every situation is a little bit different. But like, even with a person coming to you saying like, this is how you've made me feel, that ends up being a mirror in front of you, letting you know that you've harmed me in this way, but I'm expressing this to you because I want things to be different, not because I'm ready to dip out.
And not because I want things to be perfect.
Right.
As a couples therapist, I'm always telling people, you gonna have to give each other grace because nobody has gotten this right without getting it wrong first.
Exactly.
So therefore, you got to give each other grace because you're doing something that you've never done before, which merging your lives together, and you're trying to do it in a healthy way. People I want to be different than my parents and all of this stuff that people say in the therapy room. But I'm like, okay, do you even know what your triggers are? Do you even know why you mad because this person didn't text you back or it's fast enough? Like, do you even know? Right. So I think the root cause of it, like you said, it starts with self, but we're not taking responsibility of our healing. And unfortunately, almost always somebody needs to heal from something.
For sure.
True.
Unfortunately.
I feel like also we don't accept that we're human. I feel like I've told people many, many times, like one of the hardest things that you will ever do is admit that you're human and that you are going to be imperfect.
Yeah.
Like the moment I said like I'm human and I get to make mistakes, the less pressure I felt to be perfect, which is going to make me more open to whatever kind of feedback.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is shame is definitely the enemy of vulnerability.
For sure.
Absolutely.
For sure. Okay. And would we say expectations too? What we expect vulnerability to look like and what we anticipate will happen as
there's a myth, like you were hitting on, that vulnerability means you're weak. But now that Young Jeezy has said vulnerability is strength, I think people are going to run with it. Okay. And I'm glad that he said that.
Yeah,
okay.
So I think the narrative is switching and people are saying, okay, I can be vulnerable, but also that means you also have to be receptive of somebody else's vulnerability.
Yeah.
Right.
Rights and responsibilities.
Yeah.
Right. I think discernment plays a big factor.
Oh, of course.
That's your responsibility.
Correct. Because even in that for myself, I've had to learn people within their limitations, right? So like, because I know my level of vulnerability and what I like to feel when I am being vulnerable.
Okay.
If I made that attempt, okay, now I see. So the conversations will be a little bit different because I know this is not a level of deepness to where I can be.
Okay.
You test that safety out.
I think you call that considering your audience, and that's the best advice you ever gave me.
Yeah.
Consider your audience.
You have to.
Yes.
Because we expect people to be the same. And yes, it is important to be responsible with people in your life, but everybody has limitations, and it's okay to categorize people. That's a big thing that I've had to learn in friendships and life in general, is categorizing people. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't care about them any less. Right. It just means we occupy different emotional spaces.
I was about to say, but it's different.
Yes.
But also, what we're also speaking to is just the power of cognitive dissonance that women have. And that's just the truth. We know sometimes when we should speak up and hold our peace or like not say certain things because it's going to rub somebody the wrong way. But I still think as women, we still sometimes in the back of our head are like, they shouldn't have said that. But I'm gonna let it slide. Yeah. That's us like being I don't know what to call it, but I think I was just researching this. I think it's cognitive dissonance. They were saying women have more cognitive dissonance than men because women are always going to think about how me expressing myself is going to change the energy in this space.
That's interesting.
Absolutely. You're
Think
always
about the rap
thinking about how
music.
things are going to fall on other people.
Yeah.
Again, because it's not just about you. It's about everyone that might be impacted by what you do or say.
Yeah.
Okay. But vulnerability, exposing one's authentic self, including fears, insecurities, and uncertainties.
I wanted to ask y'all,
okay,
what was your path like to have you ever struggled with vulnerability? And if so, right. Like, what do you think your path was to start practicing being vulnerable, and what did that look like?
I think I started off being vulnerable, but it was so shunned and shamed and such a humiliating experience that I went to being not vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
But then now I'm back. That's how my experience was. Because, I mean, if you're growing up in the hood, it's really hard to be vulnerable in certain situations and spaces because you need to be tough.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the way of life. You got to be tough and you need to fight back. Who cares if somebody... So I think for me as a child, vulnerability starts like when somebody in your neighborhood picks a fight with you and maybe you're scared to fight. That's vulnerability. Yeah. But you got to be inauthentic now because you're going to have to fight back to protect yourself. But not everybody's a fighter.
Right.
So I feel like I started off being vulnerable and then I was like, this ain't working. So I'm about to start fighting people.
Yeah.
So that's what happened.
I would really not like to fight you.
No, I don't. But it happens but some people actually think that is what they call a milestone, like a rite of passage.
Mm-hmm. Oh, fighting?
Yes. Oh, I hate that we live in a world, but that's the case. But sometimes that is the case.
Yeah.
Defending yourself. I think defending myself back then meant that I wasn't being vulnerable. It was more so survivor's mode or whatever.
I see.
But now I don't think vulnerability is still hard. I think I'm the most vulnerable when it comes to finances. For sure.
Yeah.
That's probably a lot of us though.
Yeah, vulnerability was certainly a journey for me. Because I'm logical, right? And I don't necessarily push the feelings aside, but I find myself jumping to fix it. And that's something I recently discovered.
Okay.
But I really had to ask myself, and I think going to therapy also helped that. And we talked about this at the book club, right? Like I will answer a question, but I'm gonna keep it there. And it's not like I'm trying to avoid vulnerability. It's just
what is it?
I'm pretty straightforward, right? So I'm not very long-winded. And maybe a part of it, I don't really want that much attention on me. So that's an element of that. But I had to ask myself, what is the worst that will happen if you are vulnerable in this situation right now? The worst is this person is not receptive. There's pushback. Okay, what can you do from there? That's where the categorizing people and knowing people and their limitations is where I got that from. I was like, okay, that does not mean I don't have other people that I can be vulnerable with. This is just a person I've learned this dynamic a little bit differently. Still love them though. But we occupy different emotional spaces. I'm going to go over here, though.
Right.
But when you're speaking about vulnerability with a certain person, like you just described it, it's like I'm pointing out to somebody that they have harmed me in a way and they're not receptive. But sometimes you're vulnerable in general about anything in life. And it's not that people are not receptive. It's just that they are uncomfortable with your vulnerability because they're not comfortable with their own vulnerability.
Right. Like
that's a thing, too.
Yes. Like if I'm sharing something, like I'm stressed about something and like you're giving me problem solving, sure, that might be your strong suit. I didn't come here for this. And it's not really your fault that you're giving that to me. But I'm not usually upfront like that. So like, to me, it's kind of like, oh, let me sit back and like listen to her. But it's okay. Maybe I don't have to, maybe that doesn't have to be your responsibility. I just know now. We cool though.
Right.
But this is just a little bit different for me because I tried a little bit.
But I feel like you have a responsibility there.
Yes,
and the
I agree.
responsibility is telling people what you need.
Correct,
so
I agree.
So the purpose of this conversation may be not problem solving. I just need to vent. I need you to hold space for me. That's one of the biggest things that I'm helping like couples work through when they are going to their partners with whatever's on their mind and not. I need you to say what type of conversation or discussion you want this to be because one person is coming and they're problem solving while you're trying to vent argument right there.
Yeah.
So
sure.
I think we have to know. Sometimes you need a mixture of both.
For sure.
But
and
being comfortable saying, like, that's not what I need right now.
Yeah.
Versus not saying that, then you resent the person.
That's fair because that's that vulnerability that I'm still working through.
It's double
like,
vulnerability.
Yes, because it's like, all right, because then that shut down for me.
baby.
It's gonna happen real quick, and we gonna just talk about whatever it is that you would like to talk about.
But I'm gonna definitely shut down. I'm gonna tell you though, I feel away.
A part of shutting down is stonewalling.
Yeah, no,
that's what I'm saying. But I'm gonna tell you,
real
if I can communicate,
come back.
Yeah.
I feel away. I'm gonna need a minute.
Take a break. Okay.
Yeah.
But no, you were saying, Mercedes, that Britt, you were saying that a part of your vulnerability is that moment where you're trying to say how you feel and you're trying to be aware of like how somebody else might take it. I'm wondering, do you feel like you take the time to prepare, or do you know even how you felt, or if you sat with it? Because a lot of times when people come to me, they're saying how they feel in therapy, but they're like, but I don't know how to communicate this with my partner.
Yes.
Like, we don't even know how to practice it.
I'm assuming that most of your clients are women.
Yes.
So I'll say, I think, so to share a little bit, we've been in a space where we've been vulnerable together as a group. And what I'll say is, by the time the woman is bringing it to you, she's thought about it 100 times. Seriously.
Yes. Real talk.
Yeah,
no, seriously, because women don't, because the main thing, because women always say in therapy to me, I don't want to feel like I'm complaining. In premarital therapy, one of the biggest things is me trying to get these women to be honest. Tell your future husband how you feel.
Yeah.
I don't want to feel like I'm complaining. Who told you that you were complaining?
Yeah.
Somebody
They're
back.
like, but I don't know how to say it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you just said it.
Right.
You said it perfectly.
To you.
Right.
And I'm like, but it was gentle and it was soft and it was vulnerable.
Yeah.
And it was clear. And I'm like, you don't have...
Their vulnerability has been mishandled, though.
I was just about to say that, because there are some times they do have evidence or experiences of whether it's all right, we could talk, or we just, whatever the response is, people pick up on that, right? So like sometimes it's not out of nowhere where they feel limited. So I get what you're saying.
It's been mishandled, but I tell them to be honest anyway.
I was about to say, but this is still you. What do we win?
That's fair.
By not saying what you think, how you feel, expressing your needs.
That's fair.
You lose sleep.
I'm about to say, okay, now they're comfortable, but you're uncomfortable.
Exactly.
Okay, why are you sacrificing yourself?
So then it begs the question, how hard did you try? Right? And I just asked that question to myself.
Self to self.
How hard did you try?
So people are scared to put themselves in harm's way. And when you
which is a part of vulnerability.
And also, it's like you just said, if I try and the person does hold the space, but before they even get to hold the space, like, again, we're talking about this. That happens a lot in relationships.
And I'm quick to be like, all right, I'm good.
Right. Exactly.
I'm good.
But that's not how you have sustainable relationships, though. That's trying to get people to understand, like, listen, you guys are worthy of having these conversations. You need to look at this as an investment in your relationship. I try to change people's mindsets about checking in with each other, because everybody just think that you can just have this relationship and it just flows.
Yeah.
It don't do that at all.
I was just about to say
vulnerability is an day-to-day operation of a relationship.
Yes.
The relationship is the business. You and your partner are the CEOs of this business. You got to tend to it. So that means you got to sit down and be intentional and have conversations. I am curious to know how your week is going, how your day has been, and I'm also want to show some type of appreciation. Have I always been great at this? No. Not at all. I'm still learning. But, you know, I like it. I think that it's just like any other goal, whether you're working out or training for anything, your relationship deserves that same energy, you know?
Right, so building the skill.
That's exactly what it is. But people think they should already know how to do this. This should be easy.
Right, but they've not. What about it should be easy, though, right? Like the expectations.
The TV shows us a different version of relationships.
Right, because you're talking about two different people, two different experiences,
two different
cultural backgrounds, two different brains. Have you all discussed how you want to occupy this relationship together, considering both experiences?
No. Usually what I see is we take a cookie cutter form of some relationship, whether that's our parents, whether that's something we see on TV. We take some ideal that we've built around relationships and we pick it up and we try to set it right on top of ours. And it doesn't work.
No. So I wonder if that's on brand to one of the questions. How do various intersecting identities impact how vulnerability is expressed and received? I think we're touching on that a little bit.
We are a little bit.
Yeah.
Gender plays a role in how people express vulnerability. Not that it's supposed to be that way, but we've kind of been encouraged at birth to be different gender-wise.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, it's not that women are what they call more emotional than men, and men are less emotional. It's just that we have been encouraged to do things differently based on our gender. So a lot of this stuff is unlearning all that bullshit.
Yeah, I agree. I just actually seen something the other day that said something about people wanting to have more, like if they were having children, they would prefer to have boys than girls because
everybody says
boys
that
are easy, and they say, why are boys easier? And they say because they're less emotional.
That is horrible.
And then they got into the study and they said, are they really less emotional, or is it because of our mindsets? We're going into parenting thinking that they are less emotional, and therefore we are not giving them the space to be emotional. So we are reinforcing and making this true, even though it isn't. You're not even giving them a chance.
But it's also misinformation, because when you were saying boys are less emotional, you're saying because they don't show sadness. Impulsivity is also an emotion. So that means if you cannot keep your penis in your pants, that's also being too emotional. That's you don't have any discipline. So we are miseducated and misinformed about emotions. It's one of my biggest pet peeves as a therapist. I don't know why it helped me. I get so upset. I get so upset.
It doesn't.
We're miseducated.
Yeah, because it doesn't make sense, and honestly, you failed the son by not being responsible with
I took the E out of emotion, and I've been gone ever since. I'm like, oh my God. That's on social media.
Motion.
We
just here.
Here, baby. Here.
That was a woman that said that, though. I took the E out. I said,
there's comedy in it all.
I said, okay. Vulnerability is an emotion. It's a feeling. So you feel vulnerable. So it's scary. You're exposing yourself.
We talked about that, but I don't even think we've talked about our own, like, why it's so scary. What
the fear of abandonment,
rejection, which is why I had to ask myself, like, what is the word? Like, how much do I have a bag full of evidence? If I were to be in court right now and the judge said, prove to me how often you've been vulnerable and how often have these relationships ended. Well, in dating, that is true. However, in my friendships, they have been solid, okay? So I use that as a reference.
Okay, there you go.
On top of, like, learning to be more vulnerable with myself, giving myself grace, not being quick to, like, move on to the next thing.
Okay.
Learning how to just be.
Okay.
Because it's going to manifest either other. Listen, yesterday I screamed in my car because my ring broke. I was over the day. Girl, one of them rings, it's a ring that I got from a store at a little 5 Points in Atlanta.
There was something else going on. It had nothing to do with the ring.
Oh, I'm about to start my period. But I'm being vulnerable and sharing that I am a human and I am being graceful with it.
There you go. There you go. I love the modeling.
But yeah, that's my perspective on it. Just saying. Is this what a panic attack feels like?
Oh, baby.
Oh my God, I scream all the time.
Vulnerability is hard.
Yes, it is.
I feel like, even for me, I think I didn't even know that I struggled with vulnerability until I had a conversation with my therapist.
I love that you guys are saying that you're in therapy. Somebody asked me today, I'm just saying, do you go to therapy?
I mean, we all humans. We all got a brain. We all got life shit.
I'm a dentist, go get their teeth cleaned.
Hello.
I'm a doctor, go get a checkup.
Come on. Talk to him.
Because never mind. Never mind. Know it. Go ahead, T.
But like you said, when you have an emotion or you feel a way, you start to bring it up a little bit, but you are not long-winded. I feel like that's me as well. And and it's not that I am trying not to be vulnerable. It's not even that I'm thinking about the risk or my own fear with it. It's just that I think that's a part of my intersection, is maybe being a middle child or being naturally more quiet or being a woman that I just don't, or my natural, the therapist in me, I'm just not used to taking up that kind of space. So I'm just like, it's the short version. People want the short version, right? And so I don't even think about it as like withholding until I get people around me who are like, no, I want to know more. Like,
I'm glad you said that.
Please tell me more. And I'm like, oh shit. Okay. Now I have to practice this because I didn't even know I struggled with it.
Yes, I'm glad you said that because when people are curious about you, it's easier to be vulnerable. But that's how people get comfortable with vulnerability, when somebody is showing interest and curiosity in what you're talking about. That does help you feel seen. So if you guys, what do you guys do when people come in and are struggling with vulnerability? Like, what are your interventions?
Oh, I like that question. I always sort of reel it back to self.
Okay.
I think just And a part of it, like asking that question, what is the worst that will happen if you are vulnerable? And then I sort of try to help them reel it back in. Okay, what are some small steps that will help you? Like, do you journal a little bit? Do you, whatever you need to do in those moments. Journaling is usually like one of my first things, because I actually had a conversation with a client recently. Their fear was like, if I sit with it, I'm afraid that I'm going to get into an emotional hole that I cannot get out of, right? And a part of the conversation her and I had was me asking her, like, have you even given yourself enough credit for how far you've come before you even got to me, right? Maybe there's a little bit more resiliency there than you recognize.
So you're affirming.
Correct. Thank you.
And reminding them of their strength, their power, their capability.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's important, and I think that comes up a lot, especially with the women I work with. It's almost like a part of their fear of vulnerability is, I cannot break because I don't have time to break.
Ooh-wee. That's a big one in my therapy room with the single mothers.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God.
Oh, yeah. I don't have time to break. I can't stop. But so I like the piece that you said of checking the facts of you haven't broken. You've held it together. You keep coming here. You keep showing up.
Right.
This is a part of something that you get to give to yourself.
Yep.
You get to feel this thing.
You get to humanize you.
Yes.
You get to humanize you.
Yeah.
The work I do with Black people is saying, girl, humanize yourself. You are human.
Exactly.
That's my interventions for vulnerability typically, involves connecting people with their younger selves. That's my favorite. Oh my God, I love that work. I love that work because so much of who you are comes from who you were back then, your experiences from all of that, and maybe just even reconnecting to try to see what used to bring you joy, what have you put down that you need to pick back up. That kind of helps people a little bit and reminds them that there's more to life than these responsibilities, and even just craving these relationships where maybe vulnerability will never live in this relationship, but that means you gotta you gotta take some responsibility and say, okay, I love me more. And this is not a space that I can be vulnerable in, and that means that the relationship is not sustainable.
Correct. Absolutely
not sustainable at all.
That's one of my main takeaways that I teach whenever it comes to vulnerability is I'm going to give you the skills to identify what your feelings are.
Yes.
I'm going to give you the language so that you can practice communicating how you feel in a vulnerable way. And if the people you are communicating these things with are not safe and loving people, hey, it's time to go. You've done your work.
They're
not safe and loving. This is your sign.
And it's your responsibility to yourself. That's how you honor yourself, by removing yourself from the space that you can't be vulnerable in. Because I think that
because you get to have needs.
Yeah.
You get to have wants.
Yeah, you do. And you don't get to play small or dim yourself down so that you can be in this space.
Right. Yeah. I truly do love the humanize yourself factor.
It's been a big word in therapy lately.
Because I think even in humanizing yourself also means you begin to release the shame of feeling things, right? So like even with that self-vulnerability, you get to practice it more intentionally because you've released the shame and expectations. And also realizing you might not have to protect yourself in the same way. It might have served a purpose back then, but where are we now?
But do you need it now?
I tell them that
you needed it then. Because we don't want to discount the role that it served before. Because usually we have these things for a reason. At some point you needed it. It was necessary. How do we acknowledge this new environment that we're in? And how do we adjust?
Okay.
Because this is no longer our reality.
So now you're saying for people when they're in different spaces and the spaces are safe?
Yes.
So those people need to now practice vulnerability, and they may be struggling to do so because they're not used to having that type of safety.
Like we made this one meaning around it. Vulnerability means this because this is what I need to do to survive in this situation.
Okay.
And so we take that meaning with us to every other situation.
That's coming back to Shaq then.
Yeah.
Changing it.
That's
every woman is different. Okay.
Yes, everything is different. But Britt, what you said was also really beautiful because it made me think that when we humanize ourselves in this way and we take away some of the shame we feel about being vulnerable, we are also probably opening up in ourselves the ability to be more receptive to other people's vulnerability.
Yes,
when we humanize ourselves, we humanize other people.
Yep.
We need to end on that note.
Hello, mic drop.
Mic drop, T. That was good. Go love yourself.
Go love yourself.
Go love yourself.